come on, which is fabulous. And welcome to you. We'll get started here right away. I love starting very close to right on time because I know that it just, well, rewards those of you who are able to get here on time, although I know there's so many things going on with little kids. So Rosalie is our live help in the background while I open up the slide deck. If you can tell me if you can hear me already, that's great. And if you are having any issues with seeing or hearing or anything during the webinar, Rosalia will help you. I am also going to, though, just before I get going here, make sure you can see my slide deck as well. And so I am, oh, and if you can start just while I'm pulling this up, if you can also put down, please, your location and the ages of your kids, that'd be fabulous. We will be able to see your name depending on how you registered. Your name will appear however you registered for the webinar. So that's great, and it would be also wonderful if we could have the sense of your ages of your kids and where you're from. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides, and do tell me right away if you can see the slides, okay? And then we'll get going from there. So I'm assuming you can hear me, and it is interesting. This is the third of 3 webinars, and although we've had similar numbers, I think, divvied up to sign up for each one, we've had more. It seems like the most people attended the first one, and I know lots of people are already asking about the replay. Sorry, good, you can hear us perfectly. You have 3 kids. Oh, and you're up in Fort McMurray. Welcome, ages 3, 5, and 6. Okay, excellent. I'm not going to wait for others introductions because I want to get going here right away, but do keep introducing yourself and saying where you're from. And if you've got one particular thing you were concerned about that you showed up here today to find out more, I'd love to hear what that is. Okay, so the Great Parenting Roadmap, 5 steps to becoming the great parent you were born to be. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I'd love, if at all possible, relax and take notes. I know that it is often not possible, and you're busy mums, and I remember those days very well. But if you can, it's always wonderful, because oftentimes we'll be tempted to multitask and then find we missed a point, and then it's hard to find the time to get back to it later. Taking notes actually really helps the information go more deeply in you, and you remember it better because it's multiple learning modalities. So even writing some things in the chat can be helpful from that point of view. So this webinar is for you if you are an exhausted, overwhelmed mom who's focusing on your kids 24/7, and yet you often still feel like a bad mom. And of course, I'm focusing on moms, but we have so many men in the community as well. So I'm focusing on moms, but of course, this information is very relevant to you as dads as well. It's also for you if nothing matters more for you than your kids, so that it's killing you that things aren't going as well as they could be. You want to have way more loving and fun moments in your family. You're worried about how your kids may turn out, and you would like to be able to have some time in your life, some life, right? A life of your own. And finally, you'd love a 5-step guide to turning it all around. So a brief introduction. Some of you are brand new to the community. I'm Jacqueline Green, host of the Great Parenting Show. A few highlights. I started the Great Parenting Show 7 years ago this winter. I've been a parenting educator since the year 2000, when my youngest was 1 year old. And I have had the pleasure of interviewing and working with over 135 different parenting experts on the show. Really have worked with the best of the best in all sorts of parenting related paradigms, from financial issues to meal planning and fitness to core parenting issues. And I also have had the pleasure with some people like Dr. Gordon Neufeld. I was one of his first mentees when he started his Neufeld Institute, and had the great pleasure of training under him for a period of time, as well as teaching and training under other parenting educators as well. And I've worked with tens of thousands of parents like you on the Great Parenting Show. And I know if any of you, if you want to say how long you've been listening, that'd be great as well. I know there's many of you who've listened for years as well. And then, of course, coached and worked with hundreds in one-on-one scenarios as well as in my courses. And I've been interviewed by the Huffington Post Live a few times on national papers and magazines, TV and radio. And so those are some of my professional credentials. And while they're really important as well, I have felt for some time that it's at least as important, my credentials as a mom. And my path, less traveled, both in the sense of having a lot more challenging start than most parenting educators have, than any that I know of, but also the fact that I got onto this dramatically easier path. So once upon a time, I began like you with looking into my child's eyes, and whether it's by step parenting, so it's through marriage, whether it's adoption, whether it's by birth, we all have varying levels of that call to be the best parent possible for our child. And the reality, unfortunately, unfortunately, became feeling like a Jekyll and Hyde parent. And I'm curious if that's something you can relate to. The fact of the matter is, on good days, and there were many good days, especially when I wasn't full on in postpartum depression, but there were many, many good days where I was very attentive, loving, even at the very beginning, had many great things I was doing right. But unfortunately, on bad days, there was the blast, and bad days, and as when we get into material today more in detail about the invisible foundation that makes parenting easier, the blast was actually eroding this invisible foundation. So really harmful, even when it only happened, say, 2% or 5% of the time. And I was horrified by my own behavior. I needed a model that worked, and what I had just wasn't. And trying not to get mad really was not helpful. And in the moment, I did not know what to do. Was really even afraid that I would become an abusive parent because I was just so aghast at my behavior. And I did mention I battled postpartum depression. So many people, so many of the moms I work with have had issues with depression and anxiety, and that really undermines everything. And no surprise, kids were having issues too when parents are having struggles, especially when we're not consistent and they can't trust us not to lose it on them. It really contributes to them having behavior issues and even self-esteem issues, anxiety, all sorts of things. And this is something I like to mention. While my situation was more extreme than most, co-parenting issues are so common when you've got your kids starting to have behavior issues and you're struggling because of not having the great parenting roadmap and not understanding why things are so hard. When you're struggling, it's so common then next to start fighting with each other. And in my case, the part of the path less traveled, that's much less traveled, is that I have actually met one other parenting educator. She doesn't talk about publicly, but who did say that she also went to a women's shelter. And for the most part, that's not the norm. But when the kids were very little, shortly after the birth of my daughter, within the first year, I ended up leaving, going to a women's shelter to stop the escalating physical violence, which fortunately I was getting support that year and learning so much. And as a result, I did not have to wait for to be hit. And so I was able to stop when just things around me were being hit and threats of violence were there. So we reconciled 4 months later. For the most part, the physical was done after that, but there's lots of other ways for marriages to be very, very challenging. And so ironically enough, I've ended up becoming highly sought for co-parenting issues, both within the GPS community and on teleseries and things like that. So recently I agreed to be on Susan Stiffelman's co-parenting summit, which was fabulous and with some really amazing names. And the reason that I both became a student of relationships, always trying to work on improving my relationship. So that gave me quite a bit of expertise, but a lot of expertise came from figuring out how to make the most of my situation and observing, and then one-on-one working with parents and seeing what worked with helping moms who were with men who were, you know, healthy men, but unfortunately getting into really, really bad places. So the two paths that diverged in the woods, I was so blessed when I mentioned Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He was one of the key people who helped get me on this different path. And the crazy thing is it's dramatically less challenging path, less time consuming. When I talk about you should be able to have a life, you should. You know, of course, you're going to spend a lot of your time on parenting, but you should be able to have a life while you parent. And, you know, you think back of how we used to be able to have 13 kids and crazy numbers like that. When I was on the Huffington Post Live once, I was on with a dad who was talking about how him and his wife decided to only have 2 children because 1 on 1D makes sense. And it does nowadays when you don't have the Great Parenting Roadmap, when you don't understand why parenting is so challenging, but it's not supposed to be that hard. And the irony is, even with one-on-one parenting, even with that 24/7 focus we have, kids are not turning out as well as they used to. So you can't make up for not having the map by sheer amount of time in. So that's why you're here today, is to find out more about that. And I love to end this introductory part with just showing an example of you know, a picture shows speaks 1,000 words. Well, I do have my 2 happy, successful young adults, and I'm really thrilled because my daughter got top honors for her, well, top honors for her school last year, and she is being touted as valedictorian, definitely potential for this year. My son is applying for the honors program, going into his 3rd year of political science, and is nailing straight A's this year, which is fabulous to see. And this is despite a quite acrimonious separation with some really serious, challenging situations going on in the last 3 years, almost 3 years since I left. And so if I can do it, this, you can too, which is why I offer little details about some of the personal hurdles and bigger hurdles that I had than some. So the Great Parenting Roadmap, 5 steps to being the great parent you're born to be. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go dive into one of them, and then I'll explain the 5 and explain where that one fits in terms of the overall roadmap, okay? And for those of you, so the Great Parenting Roadmap is essential. For those of you who want a guide and companions and more information, I will share about that at the end. So basically, for those of you who want the accelerator, that's what I'll share at the end. And I will first, though, dive deeply into one of the steps and then go over the 5 steps, okay? So one of the things, just before I dive in, that I love about the roadmap analogy is, if you think about it, if you right now, say you're in Siberia, but you think you're in Miami and you want to go to Chicago. Well, first off, if you think you're in Miami and somebody gives you specific directions to Chicago, you're not going to get there when you're in Siberia. But you need to get that overall perspective, right? Not just like 2 pinpoints. You need the overall picture so you can have a sense of where you are and where you want to go. And so that's one of the many reasons I love this analogy. So in terms of rules of the road, the fact of the matter is parents are lost, and that's probably no surprise to you. It's part of the reason why parenting, there's so many factors that have made parenting harder, and nowadays you are parenting in the most insane time ever. And one of the reasons is because the fact is that we're the blind leading the blind. It's parents who are worried and trying things, but really oftentimes we're trying what we see other people do, and when everyone else is lost, that doesn't get us where we want to go. It's crazy because all 5 steps were once our birthright, and while some people had them in better degrees than others, because of course there were always people who were finding life easier and being raised in better, the fact of the matter is, once upon a time you could count on all 5 of these to some degree. And now the crazy thing is, we often have a sense of where we want to go, although I would challenge you that one of our issues is we are trying, and it's a really big problem, so we're aiming way too high. We're aiming all to have a somewhat homogenous Ivy League, you know, top of creme de la creme type of outcome for our kids, when if we can back off a little bit our expectations, it actually helps our kids even achieve that. But even if you're clear where you want to go and your expectations are reasonable, we often, nowadays, parents often have no idea what steps to take to get there, or what could be worse is actually many parents think they know how to get there, but they're wrong. So the power of insight is something profound, and that is what this is, very insight based. Insight is the equivalent of your GPS, and I love that the Great Parenting Show abbreviates to GPS, because when you have a GPS internally and you've got the insight that you understand the 5 steps, you understand what makes parenting dramatically easier, which is what I'm going to get into today, that specific step, then you actually can navigate yourself. And it's the difference of a map versus specifics. And of course, just because you have the map doesn't mean you don't sometimes want a guide, doesn't mean you don't want somebody to help make it more quick so you don't have to figure it out. But if you have specifics, again, going back to the specifics of how to get from Miami to Chicago, there's all sorts of ways that those specifics actually can get you in trouble. Whereas if you've got the insight, you can figure it out. So if you have a perspective shift or an insight into what the situation is, you don't lose it. Whereas specific details aren't helpful, as I said, if you're in a different location, but they're also easy to forget. And even if you're in that specific location, you are in Miami, if you just encounter a roadblock, and for some reason, you have to go, you can't head north at all, you need to have a sense of what direction you're going overall, or you'll get lost very, very quickly. So when you understand where you're going, and that's the point of this webinar, is really to give you a really good sense of where you're going, you can figure out how to get there, or that means you can figure out how to get help for how to get there. So rules of the road. Couple quick comments. You wouldn't head off on a car trip in a foreign country without knowing the rules of the world. The rules of the road. What about if you were in a foreign planet where you couldn't even count on gravity? And I'll come back to that in a couple moments, because there is an equivalent to that going on for us as parents right now. Once you understand the rules of the roads or have a GPS, your chances of finding your way go up dramatically, don't they? Okay, so I said I was going to dive into the 1 step, and then I'm going to explain where the step fits into the 5 at the end. The invisible foundation. What if I told you that there was an invisible foundation that has historically always made parenting dramatically easier, so much easier that instead of there being 70 million hits or some ridiculous thing, that's the last time I checked, for parenting help, you once upon a time didn't even need to open up a parenting book because of this invisible foundation. Want to know what it is? Some of you may recognize this term either because I've talked about it or because you are aware of this, and please enter that in the chat if you do. So what is the invisible foundation? Before telling you what it is, I've got just a picture that will make sense in a moment. I want to explain that I'm going to talk about what that invisible foundation is. I'm going to talk about why parenting is so off track, and then how to harness alignment. And really, I could have said how to harness it, but I've given you a sneak peek. So what is the invisible foundation? What is alignment? It is actually called alignment. And those of you, if you have heard me talk before, if you want to enter something in the chat, even while I'm talking about it, it'd be great to say, well, what do you think alignment is? It's the connection or the line that makes us want to cooperate with and behave like or for another. And I'm very intentional in using a picture of an apple falling, and an apple falling through air, it's hard to see that it's falling, so I chose an apple falling in water so you could see it's getting pulled down. Now what's pulling it down? Gravity is what gets it to keep moving downwards through the water up to a certain point until buoyancy rules overcome it. The fact of the matter is your children have had something called psychological gravity. It is a force that operates on all of us, and that is what another way to look at alignment. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. But alignment is this core, well, just to go on, it's a primal basic force. It's a core need of ours, right above food and water in terms of its importance. If you don't have food and water, of course, you die. If you don't have your alignment needs met, you can still live. And there's some great examples. One is from Romanian orphanages, because quite a few decades ago in Romania, there was a government in place and a ruler who was trying to up the population by encouraging women to birth more babies and rewarding them financially for doing so. So as a result, there ended up with all sorts of children being turned over to orphanages because the families couldn't raise them. And unfortunately, those children, many of whom have gone on to be adopted across North America and Europe, they have gone on to have lifelong issues because their need for alignment was not met. They did not have that psychological gravity, that close proximity that they need to one caring adult. And the neat thing is it only has to be one caring adult. If any of you are familiar with attachment parenting, I'll make just a quick aside note. Attachment science, which is what Dr. Gordon Neufeld teaches, and he has been primal in influencing so many of the educators I have on the show, Dr. Laura Markham, obviously myself, Susan Stiffelman, Dr. Dan Siegel, Dr. Tina Bryson, the list goes on and on of people who are firmly based in attachment science and who it's taught in all the colleges from the smallest to the Ivy League ones, not controversial in the slightest. Attachment parenting, I'm just very careful not to call this attachment because it gets some people off track in assuming that some of the things that go with attachment parenting are necessary in order to parent with alignment in mind, in order to harness this invisible force. You don't have to ever co-sleep. You don't have to breastfeed. While I absolutely advocate particularly breastfeeding when at all possible, the fact of the matter is when you understand these basic principles, which is why I'm teaching you about alignment, then you can apply it to your exact situation instead of trying to get a one-size-fits-all, which is what can happen for many people in the attachment parenting. When they encounter that, they feel obligated to try and do certain things that may not work for them at all. Yeah, and there's so much I could say there, but I'll leave it at that. So alignment does also, it does refer to attachment science, but not attachment parenting. It's natural, but it's seriously eroded in so many ways. And unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And that's one of the times where I'm going to talk about instincts being off. Our parenting instincts are very, very off. And as a result, things are accelerating so quickly that it makes it very challenging for us to parent instinctively, and really impossible unless you're in a very rare situation nowadays where you're almost like, parenting in, for example, I used to work in Alaska. I'm born in the States, grew up in Canada, and have spent a number of summers in Alaska. Some of the people in the middle of nowhere there, particularly if you don't have internet, you could parent without knowing much about the alignment. But unfortunately, you really, well, yeah, that's a whole aside. I'm not going to get into anything else there. It's not practical for most of us. So the two ways to think about it, I've already mentioned one of them, but the one I haven't is the line. So if you, and I'll get into this in just a second, but align, part of the reason I like that is because of this way of thinking of it as being the line between you and your child, also as psychological gravity. So first, talking about the line is your child has, if you think about it, once upon a time when you could count on alignment, you automatically, when you asked your child to do something, they could be, as long as they were within earshot, and depending on their age, but if they're young enough, they wouldn't be far away from you at all. You could yell something and they'd be so aligned with you and had so few other pulls away from you that they would do your bidding very, very quickly. Unfortunately, nowadays, if you think about it, if you asked a loved one right now to do something for you, but you didn't make sure you had a line connected with them, and that's, you know, either via text, by phone call, by word, something, but if you weren't sure that they actually picked up the line, received the communication, you wouldn't get mad at them, right? If that was a question mark, you'd make sure first that they actually heard you. With our children, we're often basically issuing commands when there is no line between us, and our child, when there's no line, they don't register what's going on, and or it doesn't feel right to comply, and we then get mad at them, right? So thinking about, even if you didn't get any further in the webinar than this, just starting to be conscious the next time you ask your kids to do something, to make sure that you actually have that communication line open with them. And there's a little bit more to it than them just hearing you, because you can't count on them being aligned with you anymore. But we can happily talk a little bit more about that at the end. And I will do some Q&A at the end. By all means, ask your questions during, but I will be delighted to get into Q&A at the end and go more into detail on any of these ideas. The other way, when I talked about being psychological gravity, if you think about it, it is interesting how it can affect even us physically, because when you walk into a room, you will sit typically with those you are most aligned with. And I say typically, there are exceptions. If you're really good at being a bridge person who welcomes newcomers to an organization, you might very intentionally choose to sit close to the new people. But in general, it also actually explains, though, this psychological gravity. It's so fascinating because it explains why our children are getting parented more intensely than ever before, and yet with more uncertain results. And the reason being is that, going back to that Romanian orphanage situation, it's insane and so tragic, because you're so well-meaning, you're working so hard, and yet if your children are experiencing the equivalent of psychological malnourishment, it affects everything. It affects their maturation, it affects absolutely behavior, etc. And so unfortunately, we are in a situation where we no longer can count on psychological gravity. So that's the other way. I like you thinking of alignment as picking up the line, but also thinking of it as psychological gravity. Yeah, excellent. So Wendy's asked a question about, if you mostly had alignment and lost it, how do you get back? We'll get into that in just a moment. Want to talk a little bit first, though, about what alignment it does for parents, just to really underscore this point. Your natural power to parent, as I already mentioned earlier, and I want to highlight, though, it's like leverage. You know, that's why I have a picture of a lever here. A rope and pulley gives you leverage, and you are not meant, you shouldn't have to pull out consequences. Limits are one thing, and limits sometimes involve something happening that's unpleasant, but how that gets delivered is one of the important things to note, because when you are parenting with alignment in mind, you are never trying to use punishment against your child or trying to use pain against your child. While you do definitely allow limits for sure, and you need limits for sure. But so it's your natural power to parent. It's also, it gives your children the equivalent of a compass point. You become your child's compass point. You're meant to, and even things like sibling rivalry are dramatically better when you are your child's compass point. It taps into your child's natural desire to cooperate. We are meant to cooperate, and we have thrived as a species because of our ability to cooperate and work with each other. And it's one of the many things that we've seen is broken down substantially. We don't even dare look at, we don't make eye contact with a group of teens we don't know nowadays, because we can't trust that they're well enough aligned with adults in their lives in order to be respectful of us. And the interesting thing is, even though your child only needs one deep alignment with an adult, if they don't have a deep alignment with an adult, then all adults become more suspect and really in danger. And this is so interesting, speaking of the danger. So protecting, alignment protects your children due to the polarization of it. Just like a magnet, if you're pulled towards someone because you're aligned with them, and there's someone else who they deeply hate, perhaps, right? Or they have a no alignment with. That causes, you know, the older we are, the more we can operate out of alignment. Fascinating enough, once we are mature enough as beings, we can choose to operate outside of alignment, which is why some of the things that I'm saying, some of the things I teach, you've got to keep in mind that we're talking about the immature, but we're also talking about even with adults, that when you work on alignment and you keep those principles in mind, it does make everything go more smoothly. Anyways, nevertheless, if you for example, with teens who are their number one alignments with another teen or with a group of teens, which is so, talk about psychological malnourishment, because the other teens are not able to give them their core alignment needs, and the deepest one is the sense of being known and unconditional love, and other teens just cannot give that to them. But the polarized nature of it is that you are actually meant to be able to count on, if your child's aligned with you, you're meant to be able to count on them pushing away from people that you aren't aligned with. So stranger danger was not an issue going back, you know, even half a century, it was not an issue in the same way, because a stranger came into a village and or into a family, and your children had a natural reticence to be around them. So that protects due to polarization. It also directs attention, and you imagine what a difference this makes for schools. You send your children to school well aligned with you, and there's so many things you can do to improve their alignment with the teacher if they don't automatically get it. But when they're well aligned with you, and once upon a time that was just something teachers could assume, then they've got their child's attention, and when they've got their students' attentions, they can teach them. The last thing I want to mention, this is so profound. Alignment provides psychological rest. Nowadays, you notice how there's so many immature young adults. There's immature young adults. It's showing up as them melting down on the roadways, melting down at work, not able to mix their feelings and hold their tongue when they're upset, and not able to find their own way, be motivated to do what they need to do to succeed. Those are all symptoms of not having had psychological rest that they needed to mature. And when your child does not have their alignment needs met, and again, not because you aren't there trying to give them everything they need, but because things have shifted so much. We're going to talk about that in a second. But when you're not able to provide their alignment needs, then you end up with children who are not maturing properly. So why is parenting so off track? Just quickly to go through this, societal and other changes have dramatically eroded it. And of course, I know you can think of some examples, but do put some in the chat too, that things like media, social media, let alone TV and things like that, social media is just taking it that much further. So now, unfortunately, we have children who are in our own homes. They're not bringing even their boredom to us if they're allowed media, too much media, because they are able to entertain themselves. They're able to get information for themselves. They don't have to ask you for questions. Yeah, love it. Lindsay's saying lack of extended family involvement. That's huge. And parents being so stressed because of having too much on our plates, too high expectations, working away from our children. Go back 100 and so years, we can work away from our kids and have great kids. So you can be a full-time working mom outside the home or in the home, and you can have fabulous kids. But the problem is you have to really understand alignment that much more in order to know how to adapt for that, right? So there's just a ton of reasons why parenting is so off track, and how changes have dramatically eroded things. As I briefly mentioned earlier, and I'll go into more in a second, is that our instincts are so off. And I'll also go into a little bit more the fact that we're working more and more against alignment. So I said enough about the societal and other changes and that have made alignment so off. Our instincts being so off is something I want to look into a little bit more. and talk about a little bit more. So one of the many things I'd love for you to write down, because this is one of the many tips that you'll get from today that you can do specifically differently. When you're looking at how to parent with alignment, one of the ways to handle a lot of issues better is to imagine and think, what would I do with a friend or a new lover? And I say a new lover, you can strengthen your existing romantic relationship if it's anything less than stellar by also parenting or working with alignment and thinking of these things. So a couple of the examples, the ways that we say goodbye. Intuitively, when we are talking with a friend or a new lover, we will say, you know, and just sticking with the friend example, bye for now, see you next week. If you typically see them every week, I'll call you tomorrow, I'll text you later, whatever. We say something to bridge that gap between us. With our kids, we are often, because our kids have, and until recently, we didn't have to have these instincts with our kids. They were just around us. So we instead will be often quite abrupt. And there's so many things that we can do to help our children in the moment to feel like they still have the alignment with us when we're apart. And so trying to tap into your intuition on how to keep you in their presence is really powerful. And this is something I love when I work more closely with parents. I love helping you, tweak. I thinking of one of the mums, Tracy, who incidentally is in Florida, having mentioned Miami at the start, but she had a little one and had separation anxiety, right? And the separation anxiety, if you don't handle it, you can end up actually shutting your kids' feelings down, getting them so that they're numbing their feelings, getting them to turn towards other kids, for example. And all of that has great costs, including maturation costs. Or you can learn different tweaks in order to make it so much more straightforward that your child feels your alignment even when you're not there. Inviting dependence is something that we naturally do. I'm going to skip back to that in a second because I wanted to say giving your child things to remember us by, like that's having given that daycare example, that's one of the many tweaks that we can do that can be so powerful. Inviting dependence is another one, and that just to give a high level view that we are very right to be concerned about our children's maturation, but the problem is we're doing the equivalent of taking a plant, noticing it's not growing well, and tugging at it and threatening the roots, and sometimes destroying the roots. The fact of the matter is, if you think again about your friends or romantic one that's fun to think of, would you accept, and this is a classic Neufeld example, would you accept a matrimonial proposal, a marriage proposal from a partner who said to you, sweetheart, I love you, you're so competent, you're so wonderful, and I know you can do everything on your own, and so I'm going to get married to you, and I just know you're going to do it all by yourself from now on, and I look forward to watching you work? Not a chance, right? We instead give that sense of lean on me if need be. And while chores are fabulous, they're important, and they're important with a caveat though. When you've got the roadmap and you know what's absolutely most important, if you have to teach chores and some of that self-responsibility later, you can do it. And if you have kids who are deeply aligned with you and maturing well, they will actually automatically pick up a lot of the things that we currently are trying to teach directly. And it's so much more easily, going back to that leverage idea, when our kids are so attuned and wanting to be like us, wanting to please us. So we're working against alignment. Going to quickly say a couple comments about that. First, not understanding it. If you think, I had the iceberg picture when I talked about the fact that there's an invisible force. You think of how when an iceberg, and I'm just going to go back to that slide for 1 second, because if you think of an iceberg and you think of how most of what makes up the iceberg is below the surface, right? Well, when you don't understand alignment, the problem is you're busy operating based on that little bit you can see on the top, which can get you in the situation that the Titanic was in, right? Where you can end up crashing because you don't see what's really going on. So I may actually replace this picture for not understanding it, because the reason I have the picture of an egg, though, is if you go back to the gravity idea, when we understand gravity exists, if we release an egg without anything below it and it falls and hits the ground, we're not mad at it. With our kids, we're doing the same types of things, and we're expecting a different result because we don't understand psychological gravity or alignment. So not understanding it is absolutely huge. Pain-based discipline. If you think about if somebody is using pain to motivate you, then what does it make you do? It makes you want to shut down. It makes you want to protect yourself, right? And we go into this is one of the steps. Discipline is one of the steps in the 5 steps to great parenting for the roadmap. But the fact of the matter is, when you've got those kids, when you get this step nailed and you've got kids who are wanting to please you, wanting to be like you, really internalizing your values, the fact of the matter is you will not even need anywhere near as much discipline. But pain-based discipline is a huge issue. Another question I just want to clarify here. Yeah, so interesting though, Wendy. So great question about, you're talking about, will you clarify inviting dependence as kids age and we're trying to teach independence? Again, the fact of the matter is, when you have children who are maturing properly, Wendy, maybe at the end you can ask me a specific situation, because yes, there's definitely situations where you need to, I'm not saying do their homework for them, right? Or that, and I'm not saying have no expectations, for sure. Those are both important. But you think with your spouse, particularly in the beginning when things are going well, and harnessing some of this gets you back to going better. When you invite some dependence at the same time as having expectations. So it's the idea that maybe your child, has the responsibility of mowing the lawn, but you know that they're having a particularly bad week or challenging week, you might offer to mow the lawn for them instead of rigidly holding on to that idea. That's a possibility. There are different ways to invite dependence. The other one, there's some interesting stuff around food. There's so many things that I get into when I go into the 5 steps in detail. And I will tell you a little bit more at the end about the opportunity to do that as well. But by all means, give me a little more specific information, and I can go into this more at the end. So too high expectations, I have to highlight this one because it's so massive. It hurts you, it hurts your child, and it's so huge nowadays. If you think you're raising an adult, if you do this well, if you handle your relationship well, and you keep the alignment in mind, you can have a profound influence on your child's values for the rest of their lives. You can have your child in their late teens, when they've moved out of the house, their 20s, their 30s and beyond, turning to you for advice and help. Or you can expect them to be the best of the best all the time. And of course, you're doing that because of pressure yourself, right? It's you feeling this extreme pressure, you feeling like you're going to fail them if you don't prepare them the best, etc. But aiming for B's is one of the most powerful things you can do. There's study after study that show how incredible that will shift everything for you if you back off on your expectations, aim lower, give your child time and give yourself time, right? Stop being so hard on yourself. And I'm going to talk about this. This actually ends up being step 1 of the 5 steps. And I'm going to go more into that in just a minute. And this is also, step 1 is the great parenting mindset. I'll go in more into that a little bit in the moment. But I just want to mention that the last one is mental health or stress. It's a huge issue that breaks alignment. And if you have mental health issues, if you're struggling with overwhelm, with stress, that's why I talk about the great parenting mindset, because there are so many things you can do to overcome that. And you need to start with being really gentle with yourself. Again, go back to the great parenting roadmap. If you're in Siberia and you want to get to Chicago, it's going to take you a lot more time than somebody who's in Detroit or somebody who's in New York or in Toronto, Canada, you know, wherever. The fact of the matter is you've got to be gentle with yourself, and the same with your kids. Be gentle with yourself. Start comparing yourself against yourself and looking for momentum. And some of you commented or read or sent emails in. Love all the emails that came in with your top 5 wins for 2016, because that's a powerful exercise. So how to harness alignment, I'm going to spend some time now giving you some more specific tips. I mean, already the understanding alignment. So that is the very first one, is the keeping alignment in mind. Understanding that if you want, the more you, for example, go down the pain-based discipline road, when you start down that road, the alignment will still be strong, your child will still be listening more, your child will respond better. That's why 1, 2, 3 magic works at first. You get further down that road, you get further down that punitive road, and you end up with the pastor's daughter, you know, type of scenario where she's not listening, she's rebelling, she's running off and being wild. Or, you know, in some situations it's very, very sad when you aren't parenting with alignment in mind. You've got, and you're punitive. In the olden days, you used to be able to have kids who, at least in front of your face, were trying to be act as if they were abiding by your values, but they really weren't, because even when you could count on alignment all those, you know, decades ago, the fact of the matter is when you were too harsh, you ended up suffering from the effects of having a weakened alignment. So keeping it in mind is absolutely huge. The second one, I'm going to briefly talk about aligning or picking up the line. So when going back to that phone example, if you yell a direction to a child, you haven't necessarily picked up a line, your child doesn't necessarily hear you, right? And if that's the case, then you have a situation where you can be, your instincts tell you your child should listen to you, and they should, but they should also be able to be acted on by psychological gravity that's making them want, you know, making them align with you and look to you for direction and be very attentive to everything you say. Media, even though children are in our homes, media is profoundly damaging for alignment. Can we still have some media with our children, and does media have a place? Absolutely. It's one of the things that I love to go more deeply with my inner circle work group and one-on-one clients, is how to work with having some media and getting the best of the media without losing your alignment with your child. But picking up the line, just to give you a quick 1, 2, 3 about this. If you okay, and yes, oh, fabulous, Hillary, thank you for the example of just assisting a distressed 5-year-old with getting dressed when she is perfectly capable on any other day, but she just needs help for various reasons on that day. That's just an excellent example. And so often nowadays, we are, when I gave the example of we're pulling the plant out by the root sometimes, or we're tugging and damaging the roots, the problem is it's because you mean well, and you know, we as parents are so rightfully worried about the lack of maturation, the lack of responsibility we see, but we're just misunderstanding the roots and misunderstanding how to strengthen them. So aligning or picking up the line is as simple as, if I think I won't bother getting Rosalia to come on, but if right now you just imagine that you walk up to someone, and you'll notice the next time you say hello to an adult that you don't, well, even the adult in your life you might bother to pick up the line with, which is great, but most of us are less likely to do that with the people we're living with. But the next time you see someone outside the house who you know, chances are you'll say something to them like, hey, how are you? And as you and that person have a response, so you watch, you'll notice that you're smiling and nodding at each other, typically. Not always, but typically. The point of picking up the line is to make sure that there's a connection there. So that's one of the questions that came through was, am I meaning making a connection first before making a request? Yes, I'm though meaning in order to know that you have a connection between you and your child, you oftentimes, when especially if alignment's not great, you have to do something a little creative to pick up the line. And sometimes that's commenting on something that they're interested in. Sometimes if it's your own child or you're a teacher and you're comfortable with it, touching them on the shoulder and saying something that's likely to get a yes out of them, likely to get a nod out of them. That's absolutely critical. So start thinking about picking up the line. Another thing is handling separation. I already gave you a couple tips on that. And this is another thing I love to talk about: bedtime issues with parents when I work more deeply with you, because the fact of the matter is so many bedtime issues are actually to do with separation and actually to do with your child feeling like they are heading into a huge void. And man, this is information that I wish I had when my kids were little, because speaking of that attachment parenting world, many parents, I love so many things about attachment parents, and one of them is the fact that attachment parents get that crying kids to sleep is horrible for psychologically. It's really hard on kids, but you don't have to co-sleep with them, or you don't have to put them to sleep. You can teach them how to go to sleep themselves by handling some of their separation concerns. Will make it a lot easier. So handling separation, again, go back to some of the intuitive things you do with a lover, and being a strong leader. It's just absolutely essential that you are a strong leader. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Oh, and I have just repeated that there. So I'm just going to go back for 1 second to this slide. So that is the overview of alignment, some really specific things to do to work on the alignment. It's not, none of this stuff, part of what's exciting about it and makes me so excited about teaching it is it's not rocket science. It's about, and it's not about doing it all. You can have many things that you're not doing. You can pick and choose, some things to do more than others. But the fact of the matter is that when you are working on your alignment, it's like all of a sudden the driving makes sense when it didn't make sense before, and because you've got your gravity back. So just before getting into the 5 steps, I wanted to share a bonus for you, information that will help you to understand why you haven't made changes that you've intended. And this is so timely because in the new year, so many people don't even make gifts or do gifts do set New Year's resolutions anymore. It's distracted. I love monitoring the chat a bit, and sometimes that distracts me, but people don't even set New Year's resolutions anymore because they don't have any history of success with following through. This is going to help you a ton with that. And then I actually have so information that will help you understand why you haven't made changes that you've intended to. And then I'm going to give you a second bonus at the end. So after, yeah, stay tuned to the very end and I'll explain that. So the 3 keys to change. There's 3 keys to change, and if you're finding that something you've intended to start exercising more, and by all means put in the chat some of the things that you've intended to do more of. But if you found that you haven't, then guaranteed that you are suffering from one of these keys to change not being strong. And I remember I first heard this in 2009 when I, just before starting the Great Parenting Show, extremely helpful to learn this. So I love passing this on. The 3 things you need is you need the right information. So in this case, basics on alignment, really key fundamental information. You need repetition, and if you think about it, one of the reasons why you read a great book and you have huge ahas only to forget is because you need repetition. And most of us aren't able to just read the same book over and over. we need variety to keep our interest, but B, we also often need repetition by hearing the idea different ways, and very much the third one is support. You can end up getting a lot of repetition through support, because when you get support for the ideas that you want to implement, then say you're having troubles with the picking up the line, you're trying, it's not working. I constantly ask moms to explain, okay, so tell me what you're doing, tell me what you're saying, and I love it because then I can say, okay, well, here's the tweak, try this. And it's just wonderful. Support, in this case, I'm going to talk to you, moving into the section where I'm going to tell you about how to get some accelerated help. And what I love is that this includes support from other parents who are on the journey as well. So just before I go into that, I'm going to say, I carry a parenting notebook that I look at when I'm feeling frazzled and can't think or lose my map, so to speak. Will there be a PDF of the 5 steps or anything else I can carry? Okay, that's a great idea, Hillary. I will look at what makes sense there, because I think I can just make the slides available if that's helpful. Anyways, so I will go into the 5 steps of being the great parent you're born to be. You'll see where the invisible foundation fits in, and then I'll talk to you a little bit for those of you who'd like some support on your journey, which is so often the game changer. And yet I want you to have as much, to have a real good sense of where the map, how the map fits together, how the steps fit together, and then you can have sense of, is this something that you really could use some support with? So step 1, the great parenting mindset, that's developing your strong inner GPS. And that is so important, because when you don't have a strong inner GPS, it actually erodes alignment. If you think of how we're meant to be their compass point, the fact of the matter is, when your child senses your insecurity, your doubt, it makes them feel very anxious. It leads to part of the epidemic of strong-willed kids nowadays, is there's kids who are feeling like nobody's at the helm, nobody's leading, and then they have a natural nature abhors a vacuum. They feel like they have to step in. I mentioned this at the beginning, our own mood issues are critical. When you're not managing your own mood and you're some of the time blowing up, or you're all of the time feeling anxious to some degree, or depressed a lot of the time, that really impacts your parenting. It impacts your motivation yourself to do the things you want to do, because you can feel so discouraged, and it really erodes your alignment as well. We also will get into how to, well, this is the other part of step 1, but I get into this with the inner circle group that I'm going to tell you about in a moment, how to set boundaries and limits that you need, and absolutely critical. It's not about being an authoritarian parent, but it's really, really critical that you learn about this. So just to give you a little bit of information about being your child's strong GPS, think about what it's like to have a GPS that's weak. Think about if your GPS was, or you're on any leadership situation where the leader is tentative. And one classic is definitely the pilot of a plane. If the pilot of the plane said they've never done this before, that's one of the many tips I tell parents, is do not say that you've never done it before. And of course, you probably have said this before, just quit saying it from now on, because that just makes your children nervous, right? And if you think about what it's like to have a weak GPS, a GPS that's tentative, that really throws you off. So how do you become confident in your choices? We talk a lot about that, because the fact of the matter is that faking it only works to some degree. You need to work on becoming confident. You also need to work on, I know that most of you are not authoritarian, although many times we flip into being authoritarian when we are lacking confidence, but we know that we really should step up and set a limit, and then we flip over to the other side. So that's a few of the things we cover as part of just the one point of being your child's strong GPS. So step 2, which is rules of the road, we've already talked about that today I've gone, and I do go quite a bit more into this and give you more examples and more tweaks, but that is the invisible foundation to successful navigation. The reason why I have this as step 2 and not as step 1 is the fact of the matter is so often now, and this was very, very true for me, Dr. Gordon Newfeld's information was groundbreaking, was transformational, and eventually I was able to figure it out on my own because I immersed myself and became a parenting educator and really got the repetition that I needed and support in various ways. And it was really slow for me because of having to patch it together. But the fact of the matter is that without the step 1 tools that I learned and I pulled from various sources to get my great parenting mindset going, I wasn't able to apply the alignment. I was or consistently. I was blowing up a portion of the time. The rest of the time I was parenting with alignment in mind, but those times when I was blowing up was really eroding my children's confidence in me and eroding their alignment. So that's why this is step 2, even though it's arguably the absolute foundation. Step 3 is growing your child's inner GPS. And here we go way more into maturation and motivation. We talk about things like the key to self-control and how to help your kids to master it, how to raise caring, empathetic kids who are high in the intelligence that is most required for success. And of course, that's emotional intelligence. And how to encourage your children to be motivated without thwarting their leadership and creative skills, because unfortunately nowadays so often we are killing our children's motivation, and at it you cannot be a good leader without having lots of motivation. And we just know for success in life, and we're all leaders in various ways, and motivation is key. So a couple things we get into there just to give you a glimpse about helping your child develop you're really helping your child develop his or her inner GPS, and that's how the maturation and motivation come. And I had just wanted to highlight one point, that when I talked about you being your child's GPS and you being their compass point, what actually happens when you're deeply aligned with someone, you become that much more like each other. It's actually fascinating. You'll notice this at various stages of development, that, and even as adults, will pick up phrases and ways of talking from those that we're deeply aligned with. So we're really talking about helping your child develop an inner GPS so that when they go into new situations, that they are protected because they've got access to that GPS. Kids who shut down their emotions because they don't have the psychological gravity, the psychological nourishment they need, are actually much more in danger and get themselves into a lot of really dangerous situations as a result. So that's one of the many things that we get more into as that love this module, maturation and motivation. And then you may have noticed that I saved discipline in dealing with bad behavior for step 4. The reason, bad behavior definitely is a major roadblock, a speed bump. But when you've got the foundation laid, when you are the strong GPS for your child and you've got that great parenting mindset, when you're parenting with alignment in mind, you know how to encourage maturation and motivation, you will have dramatically less discipline issues. But it's really critical to understand what discipline is, and I'm going to briefly talk about that in a second here. We go into the role of structure when dealing with the immature. We talk about a powerful tool that leads to improved behavior while building the skills your child needs to thrive. So basically, when you've got a quote unquote discipline issue, a bad behavior issue, that I teach you a powerful tool to use. And then we also talk about the roots of defiance and aggression and how to tame them. And I just wanted to go into the goal of discipline, which I love to give this definition because how you handle discipline is a great example of beginning with the end in mind. Building insight, empathy, and problem-solving skills. It's a definition that comes from Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Bryson, both of whom have been on the show. Perfect way to look at discipline, because when you're looking at those challenging situations as an opportunity to build insight, empathy, and problem solving skills, you will kill many birds with one stone. And it's a very, very important way of stopping whack-a-mole parenting, stopping, parenting where you're dealing with one situation, then another without skill building and without getting kids who are more and more able to not get into trouble the next time. So step 5 is filling in the map, and that's getting support on your journey. And this is critical. It's one of the things that I see that parents have always needed support, but we used to have built-in support. We used to have that village, or as earlier someone mentioned, not having the extended family that we used to. So I realized that one of the problems, one of the many ways that our expectations of ourselves are outrageous nowadays, is we expect ourselves to be on call 24/7, to be perfectly parenting and doing it all on our own. We have this vision of a great mom is somebody who can do it all on, she's super mom and can do all these things without enlisting much support. And we actually rob our kids when we don't build support. And so I like to start with that insight, because when you're clear of how you're robbing your kids, suddenly instead of you feeling like you're not mom enough, you start realizing that you are mom enough to build the support in that your kids need for life, and to give them the enriched village that they once upon a time could count on. I teach you powerful ways to build support. And again, even just this insight, this is why the 5 steps are so important. You having the insight that you need more support on your journey is critical. And many of you need help getting ideas for how to build and grow the support you have, and how to make the most of whatever family you have, including the potential for having a really dysfunctional family, and navigating how much you can include them still. Co-parenting in a way that builds your connection instead of breaking it. I alluded to this at the beginning. It breaks my heart to see the number of parents who are in really powerful, really healthy relationships initially, and yet end up divorced and in really challenging situations, or just fighting and not supporting each other to the level that you could be because of co-parenting conflicts. So it's one of my favorite modules. 1 and 5 are really like bookends. The second, third, and fourth steps are more traditional parenting steps that are taught, but 1 and 5 are bookends that I do not see taught ever, the 5 together as a group, but not taught, not pushed enough. And so I'm just going to share 3 pictures. That's actually my son and his unofficial godmother, and my son and my daughter's on the right. I'm playing a game with a bunch of engineers. My Danielle, who is their godmother, she is actually 20 years younger than me. I hired her when the kids were 14 in order to get, when she was 14 in order to get help, so I could run and deal with help my clinical depression at that point by getting some exercise and getting that lift. And she has gone on to become one of my best friends and has been so profoundly nurturing. We had quite a few people do childcare over the years, and she has been one that we were able to really, her family's become extended family for us. And they've been supportive in so many ways. And I include this other picture of my son on the right because I love the fact that we don't have extended family around us, and yet we have had the blessing of, through in part through her family, of all sorts of different aged people also being involved in my children's lives. And there's so many alignment benefits of that, because there's so many things, because different ages, we actually aren't meant to be in these homogenous groups all the time of people mostly like us. But yeah, if you think that many of you may not have many weddings that you go to, or many extended family gatherings, and I have gone to even like Christmas, the first Christmas when I ended up the first Christmas without my kids after separating from my husband, who I'm soon to be divorced from, they invited me to their place. So just crazy, crazy benefits for everyone, because my kids, even manners and things like that, she's been one of the people helping them with, right? Anyways, I am transitioning into going to into talking a little bit more about the inner circle, which is giving you a guide on the journey as well as support from other fellow travelers. And so I want to share a couple testimonials from a couple of the people who've done the inner circle last year. Brenda, loved this mom and her beautiful son who's 5 years old, and her wonderful husband. When she joined, she had a lot of concerns, and she shared this actually spontaneously as part of the 2016 5 wins. She said that making the decision to join my inner circle group made the other wins possible. And she talked about things like greater confidence in dealing with her 5-year-olds through his and her up and downs, more ability to stay calmer in moments of stress, a stronger and happier marriage, and a closer relationship with her husband. And I know that was a big concern. So many things I could say there, but it's so wonderful because that co-parenting can erode a strong marriage, right? And 5 years into parenting, she really wanted to shore that up, and is delighted that she did. Overturned some beliefs that have been causing chronic distress for a long time, especially related to my stepchildren. And that was so important to Brenda, because those stepchildren are who she counts on to be there for life for her children, right? She wants that relationship for them, her son, and for them, and yet there was a lot of strain there. And Grace Bell, somebody who I actually brought in to help the group, and so that's why she's referencing her as well. So anyways, better relationships with everyone in her life. I expect less and get more. So that's that aim for bees. So my goal with all of this is to open doors and to get the journey underway, or get you further down the path if you're already on the journey. So it's critical, if you want to get into orbit and you want to get there fast, it's critical to have support and timing. And while it is possible to get into orbit the slow route for sure, what I see happen is I see so many parents spending so much more time than they need to over the course of their children's lives, and yet never getting into orbit. The cost of not getting into orbit can include your children never properly thriving, right? So it's a really challenging situation, because once, although you can impact your adult children profoundly, there are developmental windows where it's much easier to teach certain things, and where there's been much less pain involved in your child learning. So it's critical to get support and to have the timing that you need, and that's part of the reason for having a guide. So you achieve orbit by having the right inputs at the right time. And as I said, the irony is it's way less time consuming overall, and it can be the difference between successful orbit and explosion. And I don't like going there in terms of talking about, you know, how bad things can be, but constantly, I shouldn't say constantly, but, you know, every few months I'll hear about some horrific story of somebody whose child, you know, someone recently was sharing how one of her coworkers, their eldest kid, committed suicide. And they had taken him through drug rehab, thought he was on his way to doing much better when he committed suicide. And it's amazingly heartbreaking and tragic when things like that happen. So just to give one more example of another inner circle, because I like to mention and let them speak to the value that they found through the inner circle process. Sally talked about joining the GPS inner circle 6 months ago, and it being one of the best decisions she's ever made. During the intensive weekly webinars and deep dives, I grew tremendously in my parenting knowledge and application. Since then, I have continued to be supported by Jacqueline and the special group of inner circle mothers who are on this year-long journey with me. I'm now more connected to my 2 sons, and I'm a calmer, more confident mother. And I love that part of what is so powerful is that it's a process of taking you from wherever you are now to where you want to be and getting you that much further down that road. And for some moms like Sally, things were already going well in many ways, but she was not experiencing as much joy as she wanted. Lots of anxiety, lots of internal pressure that she was then passing on without meaning to, but she was aware that she was driving her kids and that wasn't feeling good. So here's a little detail, and then I'm going to tell you about the bonus. And anyone, I do see some people saying that you have to leave. That's fair enough. And I will, well, it will go out. And Rose, I will just send you a link that you can, I guess, just send privately, because if people go to this link, Rose, and that's what I'm just going to mention in a moment. So for people who have to go away right away and they want to claim the bonus that is going to be offered to as many people as I can fit. So we'll see how many that ends up being. Anyways, I want to tell you a little bit about the Inner Circle for those of you who do want a personal guide and close companions on the journey. Few things about what's possible is you get the tools to get the mama mindset you need. You get help with things like depression and anxiety. Oh yeah, so Rose, would be like greatparentingshow.com/, right? You get help with depression and anxiety. If you're clinically depressed, and the bonus will handle this, so we'll get the snapshot from the bonus. But if you are struggling with some issues with depression and anxiety, we absolutely can help you. If you're struggling with overwhelm, which is huge, if you're struggling with rage issues, all of those are things that you get tools for. You get to quit feeling so alone, quit feeling like this horrible mom. And you have a place to go to get consistent answers instead of parenting tip du jour, and instead of having the contradictory things where you're doing one thing and then the next tip is offsetting the benefits you got from the first one, etc. And the irony is, in the end, as I said, spending less time on parenting and being able to get a life. So a little bit about that is what the details are. Is it's a small group of 12 moms. It's a weekly Inner Circle. For 8 weeks, there's interactive coaching sessions, and then there's a private Facebook page, layers of support from one-on-one with me to with each other. There's also, we do talk about the time commitment in the one-on-one session I'm going to offer in a minute. I do talk to you if it's a fit and we're both feeling that way. I will tell you a little bit more about that. And I did offer 2 of them in 2016, and this is the first one I'm offering in 2017, and I think the only one I'm going to offer with just 12 in such a small group. Why not to do it? Well, the time commitment is one of the objections people have, and I really want you to look at that. The time commitment is something that when you think about parenting becoming easier and less of a stress and taking up less of your psychological energy, it really is worth finding that 8-week time to focus a little more intently. I love the orbit analogy because when you think about it, a rocket ship needs to expend a lot more energy to get into orbit, and then it's a lot less. So it's about expending not necessarily even more energy than you're expending now, but more focused energy. And another thing that I just like to cover this in this main session is that some people are concerned about privacy concerns and not being on Facebook. I highly recommend you look at doing getting on Facebook, and if you are already on Facebook, I help address your privacy concerns. But the fact of the matter is, it's really great to have that forum where you can easily reach out, and most people are on Facebook, so it's an easy way when you're already checking Facebook to go on there and get some support or give some support or ask some report some wins, because reporting wins are really is important as part of you continuing to make progress and not get discouraged. Some moms are concerned about it being selfish to spend money on you, and that's something that I like to cover and make sure that you're clear. Is the fact of the matter is that if you think of how much of a difference it can make in your children. If you have children who are mature children who know how to not explode, they know how to go with the flow when they have to, and stand up when they can, you spending a little bit of money on yourself in order to get the support you need is really, really critical. So I want to encourage you to look at that. Not being in North America, sometimes people express that that's a concern. We have had Inner Circle members from other places, and it certainly works well. And so I encourage you to still look at, either way, take the bonus session, and I'll give you information on that. And then if you're interested in the Inner Circle, I would love to talk to you about it regardless of where you are in the world. And things are already good. This is really interesting because I am including Kiara's testimonial here in a second, because she was one of the moms who said, well, things are already going well, and she really wanted the help, but she actually even was concerned about taking someone's spot. And it's been so fun watching her growth and listening to her results, because the fact of the matter is, when you think of the difference of having done a good job as a parent or a great job, you are looking at having children who are just set to thrive, and you are actually then in a position to contribute that much more in your community and contribute that much more to the world, even while you're raising parents, right? Raising children. Sorry, I am glancing at, and I'm going to get to, I guess I'll do one of these right now, that Lindsay asked a question about the Inner Circle and doing it with your husband. And I'd say, yes, Lindsay, I'll give you information in a moment about how to apply for just basically the questionnaire for becoming eligible for one of my bonus sessions. And then at the end of the bonus session, if we think that it's a fit, we can talk about the Inner Circle. It is something you can do with your husband, and I'll get into the details about what that looks like in on that session, okay? Because it is something that if you decide to do the Inner Circle, that he wouldn't be on the private Facebook page, for example, because that has been only for the moms, and that I have been quite rigid on that structure because it does affect the sharing. So great question. So Kiara's testimonial and her comments, she talks about the Inner Circle being combining great information. Well, I guess I'll say the whole thing, because she talks about the beginning. If you're a busy mom like me who has already read countless parenting books and articles and have already had some successes, you might be thinking, what is it about the Inner Circle that's going to make the difference, and why should I invest my time and money? Well, she goes on to say, the Inner Circle combines great information to guide parents in the direction they want to go, with a supportive group of other parents all seeking to make similar changes. The support and accountability pieces will keep you focused and moving forward in a way that nothing else I've tried ever has done. I already felt like a pretty good parent, but I joined because I knew there are many things I needed to improve, and because I wanted to be a great parent. And who doesn't want to be a great parent? So anyways, couple last quick comments, and then I'm going to, I think Rose did already put the link there, but I'll put the link on the screen as well for applying for it. It's a bonus session, and it's just a questionnaire because I want to get a sense of where you're at in preparation. You will get a bonus session with me automatically, and it's a chance. Well, let me explain about that in 1 second. I'll just finish this slide. So for the Inner Circle, I'm looking for committed people. It does not mean perfect. You can have had many issues with follow through and still be a great applicant and a great member, but you need to have the commitment to trying again and to starting again. You need to be coachable, and you need to be clear about the value of both of acting now and also getting the support versus doing it on your own. And I do also put out there that it's optional, but if you're interested in becoming a parenting coach, this is the first step if you want to do it through me, because it's the best way that I know of to become the great, or one of the best ways to become the great parent you want to be, because of the immersion in the work and the concepts. crazy benefits of being able to work around your kids. You get to learn now, make money now or later, and you can wait till your kids are older. And there's no minimum or maximum hours, and I help you get clients. So the next step is to have a great parenting strategy session. So it's at greatparentingshow.com/GPSS, standing for Great Parenting Strategy Session. So that is approximately a 1 hour session with me, and when you go to greatparentingshow.com/GPSS, you'll be asked a few questions that will help center you for the session. And that session is basically, it's an opportunity to have a rare opportunity to have private one-on-one time with me without cost. A one-on-one session like this, I would charge $297 if I was charging for it. They're actually fabulous and fascinating because they are a real sacred opportunity to work with you, which I love, but they actually are very draining. As a result, they're very intense. And the fabulous thing, though intense for me, I've not heard anyone say it's draining on the other end, but even if we never talk again after the session, you will leave clear on the number one thing preventing you from having the family life of your dreams and what you can do about it. So it is a wonderful opportunity in the new year, and I will offer as many sessions, as I said, as I have time. I do encourage you. I'm seeing someone saying something about went to a survey. Well, that shouldn't be, it should go to 4 questions. That, yeah, it is, it looks like a survey, but it is 4 questions, right? That besides just asking your name and your kids, then it's got 4 questions, and as well as asking you a scale 1 to 10 how important it is to get these issues resolved. So you are at the right place, Wendy. So on that note, I am just 1 second here. I will put oh, Joanna's testimonial up as well. Yes, I did want to share this as well. I love that so many of the Inner Circle members are people who have been really deeply engrossed in the do-it-yourself path, right? And really trying very, very hard to learn on your own. And yet, unfortunately, a lot of times it can be just a small tweak, but it's something that can be very, very challenging to learn on your own. So Joanna talks about finding the missing information she needed to help implement all the parenting advice she had read over the years. And now she said that she's not raging like she used to, and can see herself being that calmer parent that and relaxing more as a parent. So again, it's greatparentingshow.com/GPSS. And thank you so much. I will sign off by coming on live for a second. And I am just going to glance through, but this time, sometimes I don't, but this time I ended up looking at the, oh my goodness, I got myself lost here. Looking at the questions as they came in, so I think I actually did answer them for the most part. So thank you very much. I would love to hear one thing that you plan to do differently as a result of listening to this webinar, and I will yes, I will read. There's some private comments that I'll read afterwards as well. Thank you very, very much. I will leave everything open for a few minutes if you want to comment one thing that you do differently, as well as the thing that you most appreciated from this webinar. I would love to hear that. Okay, and oh, and Wendy says, does it matter when we fill out the questionnaire? Getting too late to do it tonight? Yeah, no problem at all, Wendy. Go ahead and fill it out tomorrow. I am opening up more sessions next week, and I've got some that are already full and some that are filling up. But yeah, just get to it tomorrow would be great. Okay. Okay. Delightful seeing you all, at least seeing your names and your comments, and I look forward to, for those of you who take me up on the bonus, I look forward to getting to know you more in the Great Parenting Strategy session. So bye for now.